Take him to the house and then call him when he gets mine.
I already got me already, boss.
Oh, okay.
I don't know how to tell you, but I got this motherfucker stuffed like a motherfucking baked potato.
Do what you gotta do. Get out the rear so you can breathe. But being humble, man. Humble got me fucked over.
We really living a life that you niggas is rapping about. Yeah. That's another thing I'm gonna tell you, nigga. We living this shit for real, nigga. I'm talking about the $1 million joints, man, from state to state, man. We really doing it. And ask a nigga. If you don't believe me, ask a nigga that you know, that you can respect the word that they give.
The year was 2000, and hip-hop was on the rise, steadily moving to the forefront of American pop culture. Crews and companies were emerging everywhere. Stars were being born every day. No alarm bells rang when an obscure but very well-funded entertainment company named Black Mafia Family entered the public eye. They were opulent, they were excessive. Known for arriving in lavish motorcade, congregating in droves, and buying out the bars and elite clubs in every major American city. But that was the culture. That was the business. By 2005, their brand had taken hold. BMF was regularly associated with A-list hip-hop acts such as Young Jeezy, Slim Thug, and Fabulous. At their high water mark, billboards that read, "The world is BMF's," could be seen throughout major American cities, seemingly a testament to their success in the entertainment industry. But by the end of 2005, a sinister shadow was cast.
Tonight, 2 local men are in custody in connection with a major drug investigation. More than 200 pounds of cocaine, 100 pounds of marijuana, and as much as $1.5 million in cash were allegedly found at his home in California.
Agents say in this whole operation they seized 6 kilos of cocaine, 80 pounds of marijuana, and seized more than $1 million in cash and in assets. We expect to learn more about this operation in the coming days.
After years of covert law enforcement investigations, it was revealed that BMF was actually a cold, calculated criminal enterprise, hiding behind a very public disguise. Over the course of 15 years, the crew had made over $270 million in trafficking cocaine around the country. As the investigation unfolded, over 150 members of BMF were indicted, and the Black Mafia Family was named one of the largest domestic drug distribution organizations in American history.
If you go out on the streets of Atlanta today, every street corner's got a guy that wants to commit a crime. Every street corner's got a guy that thinks he's the best drug dealer out there. But you do have to ask yourself, was there something interesting or different about these guys? These are the guys that were willing to go one step further. They were the guys that were willing to innovate one step more than the next guy was. Incredibly self-confident, strong-willed, and willing to think outside the box. In order to run a big operation the kind that BMF did, you've got to be a planner, you've got to be a thinker, you've got to be someone who can imagine a future, where your business is growing and where your reach is growing. And most of the guys that you talk to on the streets, they're interested in getting their money today, right then, right there. And these guys, I think, they were willing to think beyond that. They wanted something bigger for themselves.
We have these 2 brothers who came from Detroit, came from nothing, and built literally a $270 million, by conservative estimates, organization, employing 500 people. Everybody who's described it to me, who's worked on it, has called it the biggest case they've ever worked on.
The whole idea of a Black Mafia Family was like a ghost story. Cops told it like you would tell it to your kids. There was no presence. You didn't see them anywhere. But if you asked people on the street, you mentioned BMF, they wouldn't talk about it. So it was very real to the people who were selling drugs and doing drugs, but to the rest of us, we had no proof that that existed.
Truthfully, a lot of stuff that sounded like urban legend, it sounded like too big and too much to be true. But that they were large-scale cocaine distributors moving hundreds and thousands of kilograms of cocaine in multiple states around the country from coast to coast, and essentially living like celebrities or better than celebrities.
They were taunting us. You know, it was probably no secret to them that we were after them. They just thought they were untouchable. They were far enough removed that nothing was going to happen to them.
One of the investigators said, you know, all cocaine is 3 generations away from BMF.
One part entertainment company, one part street crew, Black Mafia Family was an urban dream come true. The combination was so seductive and so lucrative that during their peak, BMF had 400 people on their payroll.
Where you from? I'm from the Black Mafia Family, the biggest gang in the world.
It's cross-branding, right? You've got the music, and you've got the product, and you've got the women, and you've got the, you know, the image. All these things are kind of playing off one another. If you're talking about music, if you're talking about the drug trade in those days, everything was connected with BMF. That name just kept coming up over and over again. The mystique just built over and over again.
It took a lot of ability and leadership skills to hold together all the moving parts that they had going on, just like it does in any corporation or business.
They structured it like an organization where they had like their top level, the CEO, the COO, the CFO.
Then you had your middle managers who managed each one of the different cities in the different states. And then you had your logistics, you know, your couriers. They were a very good crew as far as a drug organization.
They were really, really organized. They had a lot of people working for them. They had a lot of people eating off them.
There's the caricature and the stereotype of what a gang leader is or what a drug lord is. You know, it's New Jack City, it's Scarface. But you know, the reality of it is you get success through planning, through patience. And I think those guys, they had a much more sophisticated view of what this was about. They didn't say, I'm the drug lord and I'm going to act like a drug lord. They were focused on making money.
At the top of the organization stood 2 brothers. Demetrius Flenory, or Big Meech, was the face of the organization, the press-friendly CEO.
Demetrius tended to be more flamboyant. He was more public. He had a bigger-than-life persona, and he liked portraying that.
Terry, Southwest T, was the younger brother and had no interest in the attention. Seldom seen, he was the architect of the operation, the planner, the mastermind.
Terry was understated, very protective, and very shrewd.
Terry, on the other hand, was a businessman, was every bit as influential and competent as Demetrius, but tended to like to try to fly under the radar and stay low-key and low-profile a little more.
Terry was the quiet one. Terry was the brains behind it. He enjoyed his lifestyle.
He ran it more like a business than maybe a family.
Hey, happy holiday to y'all, man. What y'all got up for the holiday? Man, I'm trying to get everything together before next month kick in, man. And I want to get your apartment cleaned out.
Take care of that.
I was just coming up with a plan, but I need you. I need you, man.
Arnold, all right?
I don't like fucking with Arnold. I'm going to have to go with Arnold.
You have no choice. Don't, that's who you fucking with.
I don't got a number on him,
I'm going to tell him to call you. That's who you fucking with.
Oh, okay then.
Now, quit doing what you want to do and do what I tell you to do.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Arnold call you.
All right.
Everybody moved like brothers, and everybody from different places. Milwaukee, St. Louis, Detroit, Texas, Atlanta, Cali, you know what I'm saying, Florida. We got people from everywhere, and everybody move as one. Everybody is prospering in some kind of way, in their own way. Every man plays his own role, and everything starts with the leader. I'm a good leader, so I got good people that follow. You know what I'm saying? It's simple.
The Black Mafia Family was an ambition 20 years in the making, arising from the hard streets of Detroit. Meech and Terry got into the drug game for one simple reason. They no longer wanted to be poor. By the late 80s, Meech and Terry led a small drug ring, peddling crack cocaine at local high schools.
And that's not to say that everyone who lives in these neighborhoods buys into a criminal lifestyle. But in a lot of these neighborhoods where money's scarce, Opportunity is scarce. Most of those people, if you called them on it and said, how can you allow this stuff to happen right outside of your home? Most of them would turn around and say to you, well, how can you criticize me for this when I have nothing?
Terry and Demetrius Flenory grew up in the hard-scrabble area of southwest Detroit, right up against the cities of Ecorse and River Rouge. Very blue-collar, tough area. And they grew up on a dead-end street, 1555 South Edsel, a gray, nondescript home at the end of the street.
You know, Meech had told me the gas would get turned off in the winter, they'd have no heat, you know, and he watched his parents who worked have to struggle through that. I mean, he told me straight up, he's like, yeah, a job at McDonald's wasn't gonna cut it. I learned that. There was another route for me. He's very unapologetic about that.
You get the Flenorys back in the 80s, you get a couple guys who are kind of independent traffickers out there moving kilos and making a buck, but they don't have this monstrous organization and don't have the leadership skills and aren't as charismatic as they are in 2000.
You have reached the Sprint voice mailbox of 6331. To leave a voice message, press 1 or just wait for the tone.
White boy. SOS, she left me in the jungle, man. It's the jungle out here, man.
If you are satisfied with your message, press 1. To listen to your message.
The Flenory brothers were on DEA's and IRS's and other law enforcement agencies' radar for quite some time.
The Detroit DEA, headed by case agent Bob Bell, had been investigating another drug trafficking crew called the Puritan Avenue Boys.
In fact, Demetrius Flenory was arrested along with a Colombian in Detroit back in 1994. However, there wasn't enough evidence to charge him. So there was information out there for years about the legend and the prowess of the Flenory brothers. They had become too big and too prolific and it needed to be investigated.
I know they watch. I know they watch. I know they watch. I know they watch. I know they watch.
In a complex case like BMF and tracking down the two brothers, there were numerous vital steps that the DEA took that enabled them to put together a case that stands close to 10 years and involved the efforts of numerous branches of local and federal law enforcement.
And it was a logistical nightmare, and the only way we were successful was by working together with our DEA counterparts, IRS counterparts, and other law enforcement counterparts all over the country.
As far as nationwide investigations, this is, the biggest one I've ever been involved with.
And we built that relationship up, built up trust, and we shared information seamlessly.
My job is putting pieces of a puzzle together.
A huge organization that's stretched across the whole United States. You just don't put that together in one day. It takes a lot of time, a lot of man-hour, a lot of cooperation with all the federal agencies and local PDs.
If at any time any law enforcement wanted to take down their part of the case, this case would not have ripened to its fullest extent.
With the constant threat of law enforcement, snitching, and violence, Meech and Terry needed unwavering loyalty from their crew. Meech's natural generosity was the greatest reinforcement.
It don't make no difference if you the maid or if you the motherfucking bodyguard. Everybody get extras around here, fringe benefits.
I'm driving this tonight. It's gonna be like, ooh, who is that? That's Blue with the GT Coupe.
Anything that you can do to engender loyalty is going to work in your favor. Companies and corporations do it through incentive programs and bonusing. In the criminal underworld, people do it through relationships.
Hello? Going up, dope. Going up, dope.
Now I'm just calling to let you know, man, pulling over in my truck for about 2-3 hours now, man.
That's crazy, but that's the type of shit they do, though.
They ain't find nothing in the truck. They ain't said shit about the tinted windows, but they claim that they smell marijuana in my truck, and I don't even smoke in my truck.
That's terrible, that's terrible. But it ain't nothing in there, so they feel like dickheads.
No, what I'm saying is, they didn't smell no weed in there. I do not smoke in that truck at all, B, is what I'm saying, period.
They just want to look, they just probably want to be all on it, because the truck new and the car old, all that shit look new for a young nigga. And probably ain't none of that shit in their name. That's why they do all that shit.
Yeah, they talking crazy, ain't they?
They talking crazy.
I'll rap with you in a minute.
If you got a robbing ass boss, then you're gonna be a robbing ass crew. If you got a real boss who know how to sacrifice and take the bad along with the good and show his crew know how to be men, then this what you get. Everybody shining like new money.
Another thing they would do is to build loyalty amongst its members by actually putting family members of defendants, organization members, on a stipend. In fact, one recorded call, Terry was talking to a defendant who was getting ready to go in for to serve his sentence. Terry offered to pay Benjamin Johnson's wife about $6,000 a month while he was away. $72,000 a year tax-free isn't bad to get by on.
They really produce loyalty through reward rather than through the threat of punishment.
Their organization gave notoriety to people who felt they were part of something exciting and important.
They were very generous with those around them. They provided a lifestyle. A lot of time was spent at clubs. There were a lot of women around. You know, a lot of these guys on the lower level, when they were part of this particular group, BMF, they had status when they walked through the door.
Where's the Black Mafia family at in this motherfucker?
In BMF, if there wasn't a written code, there was definitely a spoken one. They were all brothers. They all moved together. Meech preached that jealousy, envy, or the distraction of women among the crew members was not welcome at all.
We don't fall out over no girls. We hit them all. They hit my hoes, I hit they hoes. The ones that don't want to be shared, then that's your own personal one. Other than that, then we ain't falling out over no hoes.
From the onset, Meech and Terry proved to be resourceful business partners capable of capitalizing on every opportunity. When Terry was younger, he was a bystander to a shootout, and his right eye was grazed by a stray bullet. Doctors botched the surgery, and he was awarded a cash settlement, so he used that money to establish a legitimate sedan service in Detroit. The sedan service not only provided a legitimate front to wash the drug money, it provided a discreet method to transport large quantities of drugs.
But that actually became sort of the skeleton of much more advanced fleet of vehicles that would eventually move thousands of kilos of cocaine across the country.
Yeah. Hey, boss. Did the black car get there yet? No, the black car, no, it's not, but the gray one left yesterday.
All right, that's good. Ask Lou, do they want to go home or do they want to get in the black car when they get there?
He said he'd rather go home. He said he got something they got to take care of.
All right. Tell him to go home while I have Papa take care of him.
Prior to the PA Boys' takedown, law enforcement had perceived the brothers as mid-level traffickers, small-time players in a much larger stage.
In the mid-90s, these guys are at times delivering $200,000–300,000 to individuals who are sending that money down to St. Louis and on to Colombian sources. That's who they are.
But as the DEA started to build contacts and sources, an entirely new image was coming to light.
What happens is in December of '03, early '04, Bob Bell, the other DEA agents, they start contacting their sources to try and get as much information as they can on the Flenory brothers. Now they start hearing stories about how Terry's got a mansion out in California, Meech has got places down in Atlanta, they're driving all these high-end vehicles. That's what you're hearing from sources.
For years, Terry and Demetrius Flenory attempted to live like ghosts. Going back probably 10 years worth of income tax return records, there were no records of them ever having filed. Along with that, they each had about at least 5 or 6 aliases and had that many different fictitious driver's licenses in several different states.
From the mid-90s to early 2000, Meech and Terry went from a $1 million a year business to a $1 million a week business. The only way to achieve that kind of growth in the drug trade is to increase the supply of your product, and that usually means cutting out middlemen and getting closer to the source.
When you look at the industry with the drugs and how the movement of drugs come here in the States, the American blacks don't really control that trade.
Demetrius Flenory went out to California. He just went out there looking for sources. He hooked up with one of the co-defendants, Wayne Joyner, California guy who knew some Mexicans.
Meech and Terry may never have risen above middle-class dealers had they not met Wayne Joyner.
He became one of the Flenory brothers' key people. Wayne Joyner was a drug trafficker from California who had good connections. He knew guys that could do houses, he knew the car guys, he knew the Mexicans.
The Colombians are the world's major producers of cocaine and were back in the 80s and 90s. But when the DEA started to really hammer the cartel's transportation through the United States, in the Caribbean and Florida, then the Mexican trafficking routes became more important, and they started paying the Mexican traffickers to take the cocaine into the United States through Mexico. Eventually, the Mexican cartels took over all of the transporting of the cocaine and getting it into the United States, about 90% of all the cocaine.